Welcome back to another Little Snippet today, and we're going to dive into small talk. Small talk is just one of those interactions that is a really pivotal moment when you're meeting somebody. And even though it can be really simple phrases, it can be sometimes one of the most intimidating things to do in English. That's why I really like to focus on small talk, and I wanted to spend a bit of time today sharing with you some vocabulary that you can go away and use yourself. Now, one thing that's a benefit of speaking two languages, right, is, and nobody talks about this, is that you can eavesdrop on two types of conversations. Now, eavesdrop is when you listen to other people's conversations. It's not necessarily in a negative way, like sometimes you can't help it, right? I flew back to Edinburgh recently to surprise my mum for her birthday, and there was this absolute disaster at the airport. They changed the gate like 4 times, so everybody was moving across the airport. And there were 2 guys that were stood behind me. One guy was American and one guy was British. They kind of struck up a conversation. You know, these things happen when things are delayed and everybody kind of goes, oh my God. And it can be common that you start a conversation with people. So anyway, I was listening or eavesdropping into their conversation. I would say this was research, okay? It was research for the podcast. And I wanted to listen to the questions that they asked each other so that I could share them with you. So the American guy started the conversation, and I would absolutely expect this. I've got a family member who's American, and they have this phrase which is shooting the breeze, which is basically just chatting about nothing. Anyway, the first thing that he asked him was, whereabouts are you from? Whereabouts are you from? Literally the same question as where are you from, but it's got a little native twist. And then he was like, oh, well, what brought you to Madrid? What brought you to Madrid? Which is a kind of more elegant way of saying, why are you in Madrid? Turns out, because this guy said, well, what do you do? Which is the classic question if you want to ask about somebody's profession. He said, oh, well, actually, I'm a cartoonist and I work for a newspaper. And so the guy did remark, he responded and he said, oh, wow, that's really interesting. How did you get into that? It's a beautiful question that you can ask somebody to talk about how they entered into that industry. So there are some examples of some questions, some really natural questions that I eavesdropped from a native speaker conversation, which, as I said, was, of course, research for the podcast. And I'm going to do a part 2 because after these questions, they transitioned into a more personal conversation. Stay tuned for the next installment.